We're back to the Catholic Challenge. I'm your host, Luke Lancaster, continuing to go through Eastern Orthodoxy with my guest, Erick Ybarra. So far, we've talked about the differences between Catholics and Eastern Orthodox, such as the issue of the filioque, the Trinity, and then the authority. Where does the authority lie within the Catholic Church? And the differences between Catholics and Orthodox. The next issue that I wanted to get into was the issue of purgatory. I have spoken with some Orthodox who believe that there isn't really like a purgation after death. Could you help us understand that topic, Erick?
Yeah. So this is a particular issue where the Eastern Orthodox don't have like a formulaic teaching, although it is widely accepted and admitted by many representatives of the Eastern Orthodox Church historically and in contemporary hierarchy. So, for example, the great Metropolitan Callistus Ware, who in the English world is one of the foremost representatives, I would say, of Eastern Orthodox theology. And he would admit in his book on the Orthodox Church that there is a purgation after death. So there are some Orthodox who have called this into question. And this is because there is a difficulty within Orthodoxy to recognize what data from their conciliar history is binding. And so, a lot of people don't understand that after the Council of Nicaea in 787, the Byzantines had more councils. They had councils in the 14th century, 1341. This is known as the Palamite councils, where they dealt with the issue of God's essence and energies. They also had another council in the 17th century, known as the Council of Jerusalem in 1672. And at these two councils, they do promulgate theological decisions, but their status is not. It's not. They don't consider them like the 8th and 9th ecumenical councils, and so it is a bit of a mystery as to what status those councils have. A lot of Orthodox argue convincingly that those councils are at least binding, but they may not be infallible. But there are binding in some sense. But you have other Orthodox who take the opportunity to say, well, they're not called ecumenical councils. We only have 7. And so they operate off the paradigm that if it's not within the 7, then it's up for disagreement, agreement, debate, dissent. And so you get the full orb. Some people agreeing with purgatory, which was taught at the Council of Jerusalem very clearly, very similar to the way Catholics understand it. But then others say, well, the Council of Jerusalem is not necessarily binding. It was in the 17th century. It doesn't have universal acceptance as ecumenical. And so some feel they have the confidence to just reject the doctrine of purgatory. What they typically reject is that there is some place of fire that we go to pay off our sins. And, the Catholic Church has widely held the tradition that there is a physical fire. But theologians and magisterial texts, especially in the last 60 years, have explained that that's not absolutely necessary. The fire could be another kind of fire of emotional purgation of the soul. There's been speculative thought on this issue. And so that Orthodox grievance is not necessary for them to have, because Catholics don't dogmatically teach that the fire of purgatory is a physical fire. However, it isn't acceptable and it's strongly supported in the tradition. The other Orthodox don't have a problem as long as the fire is physical. And they do recognize that there is some sort of pain to go through, and that the almsgiving, the merits, the prayers of the saints on earth and heaven can intercede meritoriously and vicariously on their behalf. So you do have some intersection with a good deal of Orthodox thinking on this. But again, it really comes down to the Orthodox themselves don't have a one locus of authority to say one way or the other. And so that's why you're going to come across in discussions at college, universities, friends online, this one saying yes, another saying.
Interesting, interesting. So some differences there, but mainly just because of there's no like official person to say. There's no pope to say officially like this is what we believe. Do the Orthodox really even have like a catechism, like officially laying out all of that?
So there's been several catechisms locally constructed. So you have like the larger catechism of Filaret of Moscow, which is a Russian catechism, but it's cherished everywhere by a lot of Orthodox. But you got Orthodox who question some of the things in there because it doesn't really it's not equipped a priori with a certain kind of definitive judgment. It's just a reflection of Orthodox theology, give or take. And you've got other catechisms that were made in Greece. You have ones that haven't been translated into English. You have, but really they do not have like one authoritative, sort of like a one catechism that's universal, where there's no welcoming of dissent from. And so that's why opinions do tend to vary quite a bit with the Orthodox.
Yeah, so they don't have like full doctrinal unity, then they just seem to have somewhat of like the Protestant open doctrinal debates then?
So, they differ with the Protestants in the sense that they admit that after the apostles, there were certain events that contain infallible information. So the seven ecumenical councils are unquestioned. They're almost like extra pages to the Bible. Of course, there's the difference between inspiration and infallibility in that apostolic, post-apostolic sense. But the Orthodox still believe that there were certain episcopal events after the apostles where infallibility was active. So they would differ with the Protestants in that sense. But in terms of how to interpret the councils and things like that, do they have like a single interpretive authority by which and with which to read the data of the Bible in the councils and come to a one interpretation of the Bible in the councils? The only thing that exists, the only organ that the Orthodox have ever admitted to was an ecumenical council. So they'd have to have another ecumenical council in order to answer questions such as these in a definitive way. But then that opens up the door to asking, well, how do you have an ecumenical council in the Greek Orthodox, Russian Orthodox, the general Orthodox way? And that has been a challenge in and of itself. So if somebody does find a lot of similarities between Protestantism and Orthodoxy, that's because there are some similarities. But at least in concept, they think it's potential to have a council. In that sense, they are different than the Protestants, because the Protestants don't believe you can have an infallible council at all. For Protestants, the only next infallible council is when Christ comes back to earth. So the Orthodox do differ in principle, but yeah, there are some intersections, I think, in practice.
Perfect. That really helps clear up a lot, I think. What about the vision of Mary? Definitely there's a lot of similarities between Catholics and Eastern Orthodox in their veneration of Mary, but what about their doctrines about her, such as like the Immaculate Conception of Mary or the Dormition or Assumption of Mary?
Yeah, great questions. Yeah, so the easiest sort of distinction you could say is the Assumption and Dormition. So back to early Eastern hagiography of Mary, they celebrate her dormition. So she did fall asleep, but then was bodily assumed, into heaven. Whereas the West, they did hold to the dormition, but more and more thinking about this, led to both, apocryphal testimonies, patristic conclusions and theological speculation on her perhaps not dying and how it would be unfitting for her to have died, even if we call it a falling asleep. So there's not really a substantial theological division here between Orthodox and Catholics, because even Pope Pius IX and Pope Pius XII, when they were speaking about Mariology, they never said that we have to believe that Mary did not die. And so that doesn't actually get included into the dogmatic content of Catholic teaching on the Assumption/Dormition. So, but that is the difference. The Orthodox are certain that she did fall asleep in death and then was assumed, whereas Catholics have an open opinion, strongly supported in more of the medieval scholastics, where she perhaps did not even die at all. So, but that's not a dogmatic division. The issue of the Immaculate Conception is perhaps where we're going to see more disputes with the Orthodox on this. And it has a lot to do with trying to have one understanding of what the Immaculate Conception doctrine is trying to deliver her from, which is original sin. Because Immaculate Conception is a supernatural rescue mission to prevent her from ever contracting original sin. Well, if that's what is being rescued from, well, if we don't understand original sin in the same sense, then we're going to have a different understanding of whether the Immaculate Conception is true or false, necessary or unnecessary, fitting or unfitting. The Orthodox, especially in recent times, have come a long way to seeing that the differences between us, what East and West on original sin, is largely a semantic issue. We both believe that the doctrine of original sin is not God's personal accounting of personal guilt, as if we are personally being accused for eating of the forbidden fruit from the forbidden tree in the Garden of Eden. But we do believe, with the East, they believe this as well, that the disastrous loss that came from Adam's sin, which is the evacuation of grace from the human soul, that redounds to all of Adam's children. And so we both believe that. And so original sin, sometimes they call it ancestral sin or the ancestral curse. We are pretty much one on that. And so it really comes down to, do the Orthodox believe that there was ever a moment in Mary's life where she was captivated by the devil and captivated by sin? And Orthodox patrimony is just adamant that she's perfectly holy, immaculate, the Panagia, the all-holy, more holy than the cherubim. So it's quite obvious that the Orthodox should have no problem with this belief that even at her conception, she was prevented from captivity towards sin and the devil. And so you have a lot of Orthodox scholars today who say, yeah, we're pretty much in agreement on this issue, as long as it's defined correctly.
Wow. All right. So some substantial similarities and agreements on the Assumption and just the ultimate holiness of Mary and the Immaculate Conception. Just seems to be it just needs some more dialogue, is what it looks like.
Yeah, it's trying to get the language differences and the theological frameworks that are different reconciled. That takes time, and it does take the will to be shown that there is harmony. Sometimes the human flesh wants to see disharmony, and it takes a little bit of humility to see that, well, maybe we can harmonize.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right, so a lot of unity there. What about the issue of celibacy? Catholics in the West, the priests are celibate. They dedicate their entire lives to serving the whole church rather than the more so the smaller local family that they might have. They practice celibacy for the good of the church. But what does Eastern Orthodox clergy practice?
Yeah, this is a great question. And the literature on this is quite vast. And the historical research required to give a good review of this it's extensive. So my answers will be brief, but what we know is this, that we know that both in the East and in the West, the life of clergy has always been a celibate institution, in the sense that anybody who was ever ordained to be even a deacon, priest, bishop in the early church, they could never marry as an ordained clergy. So there has to be a reason why that's forbidden, for the clergy. And that's because both East and West recognize that the single-mindedness of the Christian ministry in that sense, the ordained ministry, is unfitting with the life of marriage. Now, that comes across as very strange. I know it does. Protestants might, they go to all the scripture passages that talk about the goodness of marriage and the healthy life of marriage and things like that. We're not denying anything like that. But Paul teaches this, and the early Christians taught that the married life is a bit divided in its commitments. And so the life of the clergy in both the Greek East and in the Latin West, none of them could marry. Okay. However, the East and the West did ordain married men. And so the division came here was in the West, it was very clear that when somebody was ordained as a married person, they were already married before ordination, that they had to remain continent from that point forward until the end of their life. And the East, they also pushed for that. But there did become a sort of a dispensation to allow for the ongoing welcoming of new children in the life of priests. And so that's a difference between the East and the West on this. And it's a disciplinary difference. However, it does, a lot of people get this idea that the East always had like the original way, which was, marriage is beautiful, priests are allowed to marry, and it's all good. No, the East, just like the West, there's still a law that no celibate priest, no celibate deacon, no celibate bishop can get married. There's a reason for that. One thing that many people don't realize is that bishops in the Orthodox Church have to be celibate. And so there's at least the top layer of ministry in the whole Universal Eastern Orthodox Church that is celibate. They can't marry. And they can't be ordained as married men either. So that's a similarity with the Latin West in the sense that they both have that sense that, a chief clerical position is not fitting with the life of marriage. They did allow it as a dispensation for presbyters and deacons, but it took many centuries for that to become sort of like a welcoming norm. So today you might talk to the Orthodox, you almost get the sense like they think it's like no, God wants married clergy. Well, that's not exactly historically supported. The Eastern Fathers were very much so-so on this issue. And so if there was a priest who was married in the East, it was maybe, perhaps at many times expected that he would not be active in the marital embrace of, welcoming new children, that continence was to be observed. But admittedly, Eastern Fathers or saints did accept, and it's evident in the history, a dispensation in that regard. But we do have a lot in common with our origins on this issue, but things did end up, sort of differing as time went on. And of course, the Latin West, we made the celibacy mandate, which was basically just the logical step forward of requiring priestly continence of married priests. So it's a rich history. There's a lot of studies being done right now with Ignatius Press you could look into on this issue. Just Ignatius Press, Apostolic Celibacy in Google. Really good publications as of late.
Phenomenal. Yeah, all right, we're going to dig more deeper into some of these other topics about Eastern Orthodoxy. We got to take a quick break though, so I'll see you in just a moment. Stay with us.